It was supposed to be just another royal appearance, Prince William smiling, waving, and leaving in his sleek car as cameras flashed all around. But moments after the event, everything changed. A royal aide rushed forward. Faces turned pale, and whispers spread like wildfire. Something shocking had been found inside Prince William's car, something no one expected. Security quickly sealed the area, and the calm royal atmosphere turned tense and uneasy. What they discovered inside left even the most loyal staff speechless. It wasn't just disturbing. It was something that could change how people saw the future king forever. Join us to explore. The grand ballroom sparkled like 1,000 stars had fallen from the sky. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their light dancing across marble floors so polished they looked like mirrors. Outside, cameras flashed without stopping. Reporters pressed against velvet ropes, their voices rising in excitement as luxury cars arrived one after another. Tonight was not just another royal event. It was one of the most important evenings of the year, a celebration that brought together world leaders, ambassadors, and the most powerful people in Britain. Everyone who mattered was here, dressed in their finest clothes, waiting to catch a glimpse of royalty. Prince William stepped out of his car, and the crowd erupted. Cameras clicked like raindrops in a storm. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, his posture straight and confident as he waved to the gathered crowd. His smile was warm, the kind that made people feel like he was greeting them personally, even though hundreds of eyes watched his every move. He walked through the entrance with practiced ease, stopping to shake hands with dignitaries lined up along the red carpet. Each greeting looked effortless, each conversation brief but genuine. To the world watching, he was the picture of royal grace, calm, collected, and completely in control. But someone noticed something different. Catherine walked beside him, stunning in an elegant gown that shimmered softly under the lights. Her hair was styled to perfection, her smile bright for the cameras. Yet her eyes, those observant eyes that missed nothing, kept drifting toward her husband. She knew him better than anyone else in that room. She could read the tiny signs that others would never catch. The way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way he glanced at his watch when he thought no one was looking. Something was bothering him. Something he was hiding beneath layers of royal training and public duty. Throughout the evening, William moved through the crowd like water flowing downstream. He laughed at the right moments, nodded thoughtfully during serious conversations, and posed for photographs with visiting diplomats. Every minute was choreographed, every word carefully chosen. This was what he had been trained to do since childhood, to represent the crown with dignity, no matter what he felt inside. Catherine stayed close, engaging with guests while keeping one part of her attention always on William. When their eyes met across the room, she gave him a questioning look. He responded with a slight shake of his head, a silent message that said, "Not now. Not here." Whatever was troubling him would have to wait until they were alone. The hours passed in a blur of handshakes and polite conversation. Waiters moved smoothly between guests, carrying silver trays of champagne. A string quartet played soft music in the corner. Speeches were given, toasts were made, and through it all, William maintained his composure. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the event began to wind down. Guests started making their way to the exits, thanking their hosts and climbing into waiting cars. The royal couple said their final goodbyes, waving one last time to the remaining crowd outside. The security team moved into formation, creating a protective barrier as William and Catherine walked toward their waiting vehicles. The motorcade sat ready, sleek black cars lined up perfectly, engines running quietly, drivers alert and prepared for departure. Catherine was guided to her car first. She hesitated, looking back at William with concern still written across her face. He gave her a reassuring nod, though the gesture felt hollow even to him. She climbed inside, and her door closed with a soft, expensive thunk. William approached his own car, acknowledging the security officer who opened the door for him. The night air was cool against his skin, a welcome relief after hours inside the crowded ballroom. He paused for just a moment, breathing deeply, then ducked into the back seat. The door closed behind him with that same solid sound, the sound of privacy finally restored, of duty completed. He leaned back against the leather seat, closing his eyes briefly. The tension in his shoulders began to ease ever so slightly. But something felt wrong. It was nothing he could name at first, just a whisper of unease that crept up his spine. The air inside the car seemed different somehow, charged with an energy that didn't belong. A strange silence settled around him, the kind that makes your heart beat just a little faster without knowing why. Through the tinted window, one of the staff members glanced inside during a routine check. His casual look turned into a stare. His expression changed from professional calm to something else: confusion, then alarm. He straightened suddenly, his hand reaching for his radio. The motorcade began to roll forward, smooth and practiced, just like always. Wheels turned slowly on the pristine driveway. In seconds, they would be on the main road, heading back to safety and privacy. Then everything stopped. A royal aide suddenly stepped into the path of the lead vehicle, both arms raised high. His usually composed face showed urgent concern as he waved frantically, signaling the motorcade to halt immediately. Brakes engaged smoothly but firmly. The entire line of cars came to a synchronized stop. Security officers' heads turned in unison, hands moving instinctively toward their communication devices. Something was happening. Something unplanned. And in their world, unplanned meant dangerous. One of the senior security officers broke from formation and ran toward William's car. His shoes struck the pavement in rapid rhythm as he shouted orders to the team around him. Other guards responded instantly, moving into tighter formation, their eyes scanning everything and everyone. Confusion rippled through the remaining onlookers. Cameras that had been lowering suddenly lifted again, trying to capture whatever was happening. But the guards were faster, stepping quickly to block all angles, creating a human wall between the royal car and curious eyes. The driver of William's car stepped out, his face drained of color. He moved on unsteady legs toward the nearest guard, leaning close to whisper something that made the guard's eyes widen. Whatever message passed between them was serious enough to make the veteran security officer look genuinely worried. Inside her car, Catherine noticed the sudden stop. She turned in her seat, trying to see what was happening. Through her window, she could see the unusual activity around William's vehicle, guards running, people whispering urgently, the motorcade frozen in place when it should have been moving. William, feeling the car stop unexpectedly, opened his door slightly. Cool air rushed in as he leaned out just enough to see. "What's happening?" he called to the nearest officer. No one answered him directly. Instead, guards continued their hurried consultations, speaking in low voices that carried an unmistakable tone of alarm. One of them pointed through the still open car door toward the back seat where William had just been sitting. William turned to look, following the officer's gesture. There, on the back seat beside where he had been moments before, lay something that didn't belong. It was partially hidden beneath a document folder, just visible enough to be noticed but mysterious enough to be concerning. How had it gotten there? Who had placed it? And most importantly, what was it? A senior guard stepped closer to the car door, his radio pressed to his ear. He looked at the mysterious item, then at William, then back at the item again. His jaw tightened as he made a decision. "We need to call the palace immediately," he said, his voice steady but grave. The security officer moved with careful precision, his gloved hands reaching into the car as if handling something that might shatter at any moment. He pulled out the mysterious item, studying it briefly under the dim interior light before sliding it into a sealed envelope. His face remained blank, professionally neutral, but his hands betrayed him. They moved just a fraction too quickly, with just a hint of urgency that spoke louder than words. Around the motorcade, the atmosphere transformed. What had been routine suddenly became charged with an electric tension that everyone could feel but no one could explain. More guards appeared, forming a tighter circle around William's car. Their bodies became walls, their eyes sharp and scanning. The few remaining onlookers found themselves pushed back further, guided firmly but politely away from the scene. Cameras were lowered. Questions went unanswered. Whatever was happening here, it was clear that no one outside the security team was meant to see it. William leaned forward in his seat, trying to catch a glimpse of what the officer held. The envelope was already sealed, but for just a second, barely a heartbeat, he had seen it. That brief look was enough to drain the color from his face. His expression shifted like clouds racing across the sky. First came confusion, his eyebrows drawing together as his mind tried to make sense of what his eyes had shown him. Then came something deeper, something that looked almost like disbelief. His mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. He simply stared at the envelope now held securely in the guard's hands. Catherine had stepped out of her own car the moment she realized something was seriously wrong. She moved quickly toward William, her elegant gown forgotten, her only concern written plainly on her face. She reached his side and leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "What is it? What did they find?" William turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It wasn't fear exactly, but something equally unsettling, a deep confusion mixed with recognition, as if he had seen a ghost he thought was long buried. He shook his head slowly, unable or unwilling to put words to what he was thinking. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? How could he voice thoughts that seemed impossible, even as evidence suggested otherwise? But the discovery wasn't finished. 2 more security officers had entered the car, conducting a thorough search of every surface, every compartment, every space where something might hide. They moved systematically, their training evident in each careful motion. And as they searched, they found more. A folded paper tucked into the seat pocket. A small object wedged between the cushions. Each new discovery brought hushed conversations among the guards, urgent glances exchanged, radio calls made in codes Catherine and William couldn't decipher. Whatever had been placed in that car, it hadn't been random. This was deliberate, planned, executed by someone who had access to a royal vehicle, a thought that sent chills through everyone present. The security breach alone was serious enough, but the nature of what they were finding suggested something far more complex than a simple lapse in protocol. William watched it all unfold with growing unease. His mind raced through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. He thought about all the people who had been near the car tonight, all the hands that might have touched it, all the moments when security might have been distracted by the chaos of the event. Finally, when the search was complete and every item had been secured and documented, William spoke. His voice was so soft that Catherine had to lean closer to hear him. "This can't be possible." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither wanted to explore. But possible or not, it was real. It was happening. And now they had to face whatever it meant. A senior advisor appeared at William's side, his face grave. "Your Royal Highness, we need to return to the palace immediately." William nodded, still looking dazed. Catherine took his arm, providing silent support as they were guided back to their vehicles. This time, there would be no separation. She climbed into his car beside him, and no one suggested otherwise. The convoy began to move again, but everything felt different now. The smooth, practiced departure had been replaced by something urgent and tense. The cars moved faster than before, their headlights cutting sharp paths through the darkness. Other traffic was held back. Intersections cleared ahead of time. They weren't just traveling, they were fleeing. Inside the car, silence wrapped around William like a heavy coat. He sat perfectly still, his face turned toward the window, watching the city blur past. Street lights created patterns of light and shadow across his features, making him look older somehow, burdened by thoughts Catherine could only guess at. Her hand found his in the darkness between them. His fingers were cold, and they closed around hers with a grip that spoke of need, of gratitude for an anchor in a suddenly uncertain world. William's mind had traveled far from the present moment. He was remembering things he had pushed aside, dismissed as unimportant or coincidental. A letter that had arrived months ago with no return address, its words cryptic but somehow menacing. A strange encounter at another event, a person who had looked at him with eyes that knew too much. An untraceable message that had appeared on a secure line, brief and mysterious. At the time, security had investigated each incident and found nothing concrete. The letter was analyzed and filed away. The stranger was never identified in the crowd. The message was traced to a dead end. Each event alone seemed like nothing. But together, viewed through the lens of tonight's discovery, they formed a pattern. Someone had been watching. Someone had been planning. And tonight, they had made their move. Catherine watched her husband's face, seeing the wheels turning behind his eyes. She squeezed his hand gently, a silent question, a wordless offer of support. But she also knew him well enough to wait. He would share when he was ready, when he had sorted through the chaos in his own mind. The towers of Buckingham Palace appeared in the distance, illuminated against the night sky. Usually, the sight brought comfort, a return to safety, to home. But tonight, even the palace walls seemed less secure than they had that morning. As they drew closer, William finally spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone is trying to send a message." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of message? But William didn't answer. Perhaps he didn't know yet. Or perhaps the answer was too troubling to voice in the darkness of a moving car, even to her. The envelope containing the mysterious items had been rushed ahead. By now, it would be in the hands of the palace's top security team, being examined, analyzed, tested for anything that might reveal its origins or purpose. The motorcade passed through the palace gates, which closed immediately behind them with a heavy final sound. In the courtyard, a small group waited despite the late hour. Top royal advisors stood in a tight cluster, their faces serious. The head of security was there too, his posture rigid with professional concern. As William's car came to a stop, he took one deep breath, straightening his shoulders. Whatever came next, whatever those items meant, whatever message someone was trying to send, he would face it. He was a prince, trained since birth for moments of crisis. The private room deep within Buckingham Palace had witnessed countless moments of history. But tonight, it held a different kind of weight. Heavy curtains blocked out the world beyond the windows. The door was locked, guarded from the outside. Inside, a small circle of people gathered around a polished table, their faces drawn with concern. William sat at the head of the table, Catherine beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Around them were only the most trusted officials. The head of security, two senior advisors who had served the royal family for decades, and the private secretary whose discretion was beyond question. These were people who had proven their loyalty through years of service, people who understood that what happened in this room would never leave it. The sealed envelope lay in the center of the table like a sleeping serpent, innocent in appearance but potentially dangerous in content. Everyone stared at it, no one eager to be the first to move. Finally, the head of security pulled on a fresh pair of gloves and reached forward. He broke the seal slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might trigger something catastrophic. The room held its collective breath as he opened the envelope and began removing its contents, placing each item on the table with deliberate care. An old photograph, its edges worn and slightly yellowed with age. A letter, folded and creased as if it had been read many times. And something else, a small card bearing a strange symbol, intricate and unfamiliar, drawn in what looked like faded ink. William leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the items. As he studied them, his expression transformed. The professional mask he had worn all evening cracked and fell away, revealing raw emotion beneath. His breathing quickened. His hands, resting on the table, began to tremble slightly. Catherine saw the change immediately. She moved closer, her eyes searching his face with growing alarm. Whatever he was seeing, whatever those items meant to him, it was cutting deep into places he usually kept carefully guarded. The photograph showed a woman William would have recognized anywhere: his mother, Princess Diana, looking young and radiant. But she wasn't alone in the picture. She stood next to someone whose face had been carefully obscured, as if scratched away deliberately. The background suggested privacy, intimacy, a moment never meant for public eyes. The letter was harder to read, its handwriting elegant but hurried. Only fragments were clear, but those fragments contained names, dates, and references that made everyone in the room exchange uncomfortable glances. This wasn't just old correspondence. This was something that connected to events they thought were long settled, questions they believed had been answered. And the symbol, none of them recognized it immediately, but its presence felt intentional, significant. It appeared again at the bottom of the letter, drawn with the same careful hand that had written the words above it. William reached out with unsteady fingers and picked up the photograph. His eyes filled with moisture as he stared at his mother's face, frozen in time, happy in a moment he had never known about. His jaw tightened as he fought to maintain control over emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. One of the senior advisors cleared his throat softly. Your Royal Highness, we need to determine if these items are authentic. William nodded without looking up, still lost in the photograph. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with feeling. They're real. I can feel it. Catherine's hand tightened on his arm, trying to anchor him to the present moment. She looked at the items spread before them and felt her own heart ache. Whatever secrets these objects held, they were about to turn their world upside down. If this is real, it changes everything, William said quietly, finally setting the photograph down. The words settled over the room like falling snow, quiet but transformative. Everyone understood the implications. If these items were genuine, if they pointed to truths that had been hidden or denied, then the foundation of things they thought they knew might be built on sand. The head of security spoke with calm authority. We'll launch a full investigation immediately. Complete discretion. No media leaks, no external involvement. Within the hour, Palace security moved into action with silent efficiency. Every person who had been near William's car that evening was quietly contacted and brought in for questioning. Staff members, event coordinators, security personnel, even the drivers, all were interviewed with polite but thorough attention to detail. Camera footage from every angle was pulled and reviewed, hour after hour of recording scrutinized for anything unusual. The security team worked through the night, their eyes burning from staring at screens, searching for the moment when someone had placed those items in the royal vehicle. And then they found him. A man, caught on camera for just a few seconds, moving near William's car during a brief moment when guards had been distracted by the crowd. He wore ordinary clothing, nothing that would draw attention. His face was partially hidden by a cap pulled low. He moved with purpose but not haste, reaching into the car and withdrawing just as quickly, melting back into the background before anyone noticed. The security team enhanced the image, trying to identify him, but the angle was wrong and the quality too poor. He was a ghost there and gone, leaving behind only questions and the mysterious items that had shocked them all. William watched the footage repeatedly, studying the unknown man's movements, trying to find meaning in the brief glimpse. Who was this person? What did he want? And most importantly, how did he know about things that should have remained buried? He felt torn between two powerful emotions that warred within him. Fear whispered that some truths were dangerous, that investigating might unleash forces better left alone. But anger burned hotter, insisting that he deserved to know, that someone was playing games with his family's history and he wouldn't stand for it. Catherine remained by his side through it all, a steady presence when everything else felt uncertain. She said little, knowing that sometimes support meant simply being there, not trying to fix what couldn't be easily repaired. She checked on the children, making sure they remained unaware of the crisis unfolding around them, protecting their innocence even as she worried about their future. The night deepened, stretching toward dawn. Most of the palace slept, unaware of the drama unfolding in hidden rooms. William finally retreated to his private study, exhausted but unable to rest. His mind spun with questions, possibilities, fears he couldn't voice even to Catherine. He sat in the darkness, staring at nothing, when his private phone buzzed. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. He picked it up, expecting a message from security with an update. Instead, he found a text from an unknown number. Just 6 words, but they hit him like a physical blow. Now you know where it began. His hands tightened around the phone until his knuckles turned white. He read the message again, then again, as if repetition might reveal hidden meaning. Someone out there knew what he had found. Someone was watching, waiting, orchestrating this entire situation. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Royal Archive, casting long shadows across rows of ancient filing cabinets and shelves lined with leather-bound volumes. This part of the palace rarely saw visitors. Dust motes danced in the pale sunlight, undisturbed for years until today. William entered alone, having dismissed his usual security detail with firm but gentle insistence. What he needed to do here required privacy, silence, and the freedom to search without curious eyes watching his every move. The archivist, a woman who had served the palace for 30 years, greeted him with surprise but asked no questions. Royals who came seeking old records always had their reasons. He made his request carefully, keeping his voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface files from his mother's time, documents that hadn't been touched since the late 90s, personal correspondence, meeting notes, anything that might have been sealed away after her death. The archivist's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded and disappeared into the maze of shelves. William waited, his heart beating faster with each passing minute. He had barely slept after receiving that mysterious message. His mind had worked through the night, connecting dots, following threads of memory and intuition that all led back to this moment. When the archivist returned, she carried several boxes, their labels faded with time. She set them on a long table and quietly left him alone, understanding without being told that this was a private matter. William opened the first box with hands that wanted to shake but refused to let them. Inside lay stacks of papers, photographs, and folders organized by date. He began sorting through them methodically, though his eyes hunted desperately for anything that matched what he had seen the night before. Hours passed. The morning stretched into the afternoon. And slowly, painfully, a pattern began to emerge. Letters written in his mother's distinctive handwriting, some marked with symbols in the margins, the same intricate design that had appeared on the card found in his car. Meeting notes that referenced concerns about privacy, about trust, about people who might not have her best interests at heart. Documents that suggested Diana had been aware of things happening around her, threats, both subtle and direct, that she had tried to document and protect herself against. William's chest tightened as he read words his mother had written decades ago. Her voice came through the pages, strong but worried, loving but cautious. She had known something. She had feared something. And she had tried to leave a trail, a warning for those who might need it later. His phone buzzed, pulling him from the depths of the past. Catherine's name appeared on the screen. He answered, his voice rough from hours of silence. She spoke quickly, urgently. She had been doing her own investigation, reviewing Diana's personal effects stored in another part of the palace. Among the items, she had found notebooks filled with private thoughts and observations. And there, scattered throughout the pages, were those same symbols drawn repeatedly, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanying names or dates that clearly meant something important. William closed his eyes, the pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. Someone close to the family had known about these symbols and had understood their significance. Someone had access to information that should have remained locked away forever. That evening, as darkness settled over the palace once more, William made a decision. He needed answers that couldn't be found in old papers and forgotten files. He needed to speak with someone who had been there, who had known his mother during those troubled times. The man he sought was elderly now, retired from royal service, but still living nearby. He had been one of Diana's advisors during her final years, someone she had trusted when trust became a rare commodity. William appeared at his door unannounced, and the old man's face went pale when he saw who stood before him. They sat in a modest living room, far from the grandeur of palaces and protocol. William didn't waste time with pleasantries. He described what had been found in his car, showed photographs of the items on his phone, and waited. The old advisor's hands trembled as he looked at the images. He was silent for a long moment, wrestling with decisions about loyalty and truth. Finally, he began to speak, his voice heavy with years of carrying secrets. Diana had feared this exact situation, he explained. She had known that certain letters and documents in her possession contained information that powerful people would want suppressed. She had worried that these materials might someday be used against her sons, twisted into weapons or revealed at moments designed to cause maximum damage. She had tried to secure everything, to control what would happen to her private papers after her death. But in the chaos that followed her passing, things had been scattered, lost, or possibly taken by people who understood their value. The letter found in William's car, the advisor confirmed with sad certainty, was one of those missing pieces. Diana had written it during a particularly difficult period, and it contained warnings about people still active within the royal circle, names, concerns, observations about those she suspected of working against her interests. William sat frozen as the full picture crystallized before him. The discovery wasn't random. It wasn't a security breach or a strange coincidence. Someone had deliberately placed those items where he would find them. Someone wanted him to see what his mother had written, to know what she had feared, to understand that the past wasn't as settled as everyone pretended. But why now? After all these years, why surface these secrets in such a dramatic way? The advisor had no answer to that question. He could only offer what he knew, what he had witnessed, what he had kept silent about for decades out of respect for Diana's memory and fear of the consequences. William left as quietly as he had arrived, his mind reeling. He drove through the dark streets himself, needing the simple act of controlling anything in a world that suddenly felt beyond his control. Back in his private quarters, Catherine waited. She saw the truth written on his face before he spoke a word. She moved to him, wrapping her arms around him as he finally let himself feel the weight of everything he had learned. They stood together in the darkness, two people trying to make sense of a puzzle that spanned decades and touched the deepest wounds of William's past. Outside, the palace continued its routines, unaware that one of its princes was uncovering truths that had been buried with his mother. William pulled back slightly, looking at Catherine with eyes that held both pain and determination. He whispered the words that had been forming in his mind all day, the realization that changed everything. Someone wants me to remember what she couldn't say. The emergency meeting had been called before sunrise. In a grand room usually reserved for ceremonial occasions, senior palace officials gathered with grave faces and worried whispers. They sat in high-backed chairs arranged in a semicircle, all eyes fixed on William, who stood rather than sat, his posture rigid with barely contained frustration. The oldest advisor, a man who had served 3 generations of royals, cleared his throat and began the speech they had clearly rehearsed. The monarchy's image must be protected above all else. Scandals, even those rooted in the distant past, could damage public trust. The best course of action was silence, seal away the discovered items, end the investigation quietly, and let the matter fade into the shadows where it belonged. William listened to every word, his jaw tightening with each carefully crafted argument for secrecy. When the advisor finished, silence filled the room like standing water, stagnant and uncomfortable. Then William spoke, and his voice carried a steel edge that made several officials shift nervously in their seats. He refused. Flatly, completely, without room for negotiation. He wanted answers about who had taken his mother's private letters, who had kept them hidden for decades, and who was now using them to send cryptic messages. He wanted justice not just for himself, but for the memory of a woman who had been silenced in life and was being manipulated in death. The tension in the room became almost physical. Some advisors exchanged glances that seemed to carry hidden meanings. Others stared at their hands, suddenly fascinated by their own fingers. A few showed visible nervousness, faces going pale, hands fidgeting with papers that didn't need adjusting. William noticed everything. He had been trained since childhood to read rooms, to catch the subtle tells that revealed what people truly thought beneath their diplomatic words. And what he saw now troubled him deeply. These men weren't just concerned about public relations. Some of them were frightened, and fear only made sense if they had something to lose. The meeting dissolved without resolution, officials departing with tight lips and worried eyes. William remained behind, staring at the empty chairs, wondering which of these trusted servants might be hiding secrets of their own. At home, Catherine felt the change in atmosphere like a shift in air pressure before a storm. Strange things had begun happening around their private residence within the palace grounds, small things at first. Items moved from where she had placed them. Doors left open that she remembered closing. The feeling of being watched, even in supposedly secure spaces. She said nothing to William at first, not wanting to add to his burden. But when she found footprints in the garden beneath their bedroom window, prints that were fresh despite security sweeps supposedly covering every inch of the grounds, her maternal instincts overrode her desire to protect him from worry. That night, she told him everything. They stood together in their bedroom, speaking in hushed tones even though they were alone, both suddenly aware of how vulnerable they truly were despite all the guards and protocols meant to keep them safe. William's face darkened with anger and concern. He immediately contacted the head of security, demanding increased surveillance and protection, especially around areas where their children played and slept. The breakthrough came 3 nights later, at an hour when most of the palace slept peacefully. Motion sensors near William's private garage triggered an alarm, silent but immediate. Security personnel responded within seconds, moving through the darkness with practiced efficiency and drawn weapons. They spotted a figure crouched near William's car, doing something they couldn't quite see from their position. The guards called out, identifying themselves, ordering the person to freeze. But instead of compliance, the intruder bolted. The chase was brief and chaotic. The figure moved with surprising speed through gardens and pathways, clearly familiar with the layout despite the darkness. Guards pursued, shouting into radios, coordinating their pursuit. But the intruder had planned an escape route, slipping through a service entrance that should have been locked but somehow stood open. By the time additional security reached the exit point, the person had vanished into the London night, leaving behind only questions and the sound of running footsteps fading into silence. But in their haste to escape, the intruder had dropped something. A guard found it lying on the ground near where they had first spotted the figure, another envelope, this one unsealed, its contents partially visible. William was woken and brought to the security office immediately. Under bright lights and the watchful eyes of his protection team, he opened the envelope fully and withdrew what lay inside. Another letter, the paper old and delicate, the handwriting achingly familiar. His mother's words stared up at him from across the years. But unlike the previous discovery, this letter was different, more personal, more raw. It spoke of fears she couldn't voice publicly, of truths she had tried to document for a future day when they might be needed. And at the bottom, underlined twice as if for emphasis, was a line that made William's blood run cold. The cryptic sentence hinted at unfinished business, at secrets that reached beyond her own story into the present day. It suggested that what she had feared wasn't just about her own safety, but about the future of her sons and the family they would one day lead. William read the words over and over, each pass revealing new layers of meaning. His mother had been trying to protect him, even then trying to leave breadcrumbs that might someday guide him through dangers she knew were coming but couldn't fully name. Something shifted in him at that moment. This wasn't just about solving a mystery or catching whoever was leaving these messages. This was about understanding that the past and present were tangled together, that old threats could reach forward through time to touch the people he loved most. He finally understood. This wasn't only about the past. It was about protecting the future. The decision crystallized in his mind with absolute clarity. No more hiding. No more secrets. No more letting unnamed forces control the narrative through fear and manipulation. He would reveal everything, regardless of what the advisors wanted, regardless of the consequences to his own reputation or comfort. The next morning, William requested the presence of his closest advisors and key family members. They assembled in a private drawing room, confusion evident on most faces. No one had expected this gathering, and the formality of the summons suggested something significant. William stood before them, Catherine at his side, her presence a silent statement of unity and support. He began to speak, his voice calm but carrying an authority that came from absolute certainty in his decision. He told them everything. The discovery in his car, the archive research, the conversation with his mother's old advisor, the midnight intruder, the letters that kept appearing like ghosts refusing to stay buried. He laid out the whole story without embellishment or dramatization, just facts presented in their stark, uncomfortable truth. The disturbing discovery, he explained, wasn't a bomb or a weapon or anything physically dangerous. It was something far more emotionally devastating. Proof that his mother's private words, her deepest fears and most personal thoughts, had been stolen from her. They had been hidden away by people who understood their power, then used across the years to manipulate and control.